Woohoo. Hello, everybody, and welcome to September's PDN Live. I'm Shannon, your moderator, and with me tonight I have Aaron Jannetti and Rob Pincus, and tonight we're talking about active shooter situations and scenarios. So welcome to the show, and Rob, good to see you again. Do you want to update us on what you've been up to, where you've been training, and anything else going on?
Wow, so I am actually down at the Eastern HQ in St. Augustine, Florida. I'm actually up in Jacksonville right now, but St. Augustine, Florida for the last week. We had the 9th annual Combat Focused Shooting Instructor Conference down at the home range, Ancient City Shooting Range in St. Augustine. And the last couple of days I've been working on videos. People have been watching the Worlds Collide videos that I've been doing with Rob Latham. Springfield obviously is sponsoring all that. Did another great series today. Also did a whole bunch of other videos over the last 2 days for Personal Defense Network that people will see over the fourth quarter, probably going into the first quarter as well for some of that Worlds Collide stuff. Lots of new cool stuff, lots of new cool products from our sponsors coming out, including some new stuff from Springfield people are going to like. I've been involved in their launch of the Defend Your Legacy campaign and the Saint, which is going to be that people have probably seen some of the social media hype on that. So the Saint will be announced in November, exactly what that is from Springfield, part of that Defend Your Legacy. And of course, at Personal Defense Network, we've talked a lot about protect what you love. A lot of what we talk about tonight related to active shooter response will be about protecting what you love should you get caught with your family in a public space spree killing event, and maybe thinking about protecting yourself so that you can take advantage of the things that you love and by getting away and not feeling like you need to try to be that hero that we see people talk about on the internet. So I think a lot of the things we've been doing lately since the tour ended are going to play really closely into this active shooter response, including the fact that we did our first active shooter response instructor development course. Aaron will probably talk a little bit more about that. He's the head of ICE training and Endeavor Defense and Fitness, the team up combo active shooter response course that we've got. For those who don't know, Aaron and I are business partners. We're co-owners in the CrossFit Gym, the Defensive Training Center in Hilliard, Ohio, along with Rob McKeeman. And those guys have really taken the active shooter thing to heart and done a lot with it. They've done a lot of evolution, a lot of good work. He'll tell you how many classes he's done, but dozens of classes this year around the country. Most of them free seminars or at least very low cost seminars for people interested in understanding all the things we're going to be talking about tonight. So it's an exciting time. I'm getting ready to head up to New England to the Live Free or Die shoot. I'm going to do a class right before that. And then we've got a class in Tennessee this weekend and some classes coming up in Texas right after Thanksgiving. I'll be back down in Florida in November, SWAT roundup. Be back here, of course, for Election Day to vote since this is my home state. And there's a lot going on.
Yeah. And where can people find you online or on social media?
Pincus Rob at Instagram and Twitter, and Rob Pincus at all the regular social media, Facebook, and all that kind of stuff. You know, if you can use the Google, if you're watching a Google Hangout, if you're watching this live event, you probably know where to find me on social media or how to find me on social media. Tonight, you've asked a bunch of questions. I already know, Shannon, you've told me there's a bunch of great questions from the audience, but people can post questions anytime at any of the social media or certainly at personaldefensenetwork.com.
Awesome. And Aaron, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself and kind of give us a background on your experience and where people can find you online, as well as what tonight's topic means to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I've watched a bunch of these, so it's a pleasure to kind of be on the other side of it. So my name is Aaron Jannetti. As Rob mentioned, there's three of us here essentially at Endeavor that run it. So Robert McKeeman is one of the major business partners here, and then Rob Pincus as well. We do strength conditioning, we do self-defense, both armed and unarmed, various aspects. But one of the main things that we do is we travel around teaching seminars. The big seminar this last couple of years and what we've been doing for a while now is our active shooter response. And that's pretty much what brings us here tonight. We get the question all the time, which is kind of interesting, which is what makes you an expert in active shooter response? And there's no certification out there. We've been teaching this in some form or fashion since about 2009, along with a lot of other great minds that have been surrounded around it. And it's just kind of developed and evolved over the years. And I think the implementation of what we've been able to develop on the unarmed side and everything that Rob's done, starting with the ASR program that we did, I think 4 or 5 years now, 3 years ago. I think we started running that one. Yeah. It's just kind of developed in the program that we have now. So we've been traveling around doing a lot of those. As Rob mentioned, we're going on to our 49th seminar. Will be, well, technically this weekend on Sunday, we're doing kind of a second rendition of it. But we're heading past 50 since just January, which is kind of crazy if you think since 2009, from 2009 to about end of 2015, we may have done 30 of these in that 6-year span. And to think just from January now, coming into late September, we've already done roughly 50 of them. Kind of shows you the tone of everyone that's being a little more accepting to the training, the tone of everything that's going on atmosphere-wise with the country in general. So we've been getting out, and now we're, again, with the instructor development program, trying to expand the team and be able to get this to as many people as we possibly can going forward. So as far as where you can find our stuff, Endeavor DCF, that's a dog, cat, fish, pretty much on everything as far as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can find me at Jannetti Aaron at Facebook or Aaron Jannetti on the Instagrams, stuff like that. So, but we have a lot of stuff out on Facebook as far as different programs that we do.
Awesome. We'll look forward to having you on our show tonight. So for those of you that are tuning in live, we got in a lot of questions on this topic, but still feel free to ask any questions that you may have that come up, or if you need us to kind of expand on topic again, just feel free to go ahead and type that. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for our free newsletter. You can find Personal Defense Network online, facebook.com, Personal Defense Network, Instagram, P_D_N, and of course on Twitter at PD Network. So we'll jump right in with some questions that we got earlier this week. So Aaron, we have Carter who asked, as a member of his company's safety committee, he's actively evaluating active shooter response training programs and consultants. Most of his programs available have an obvious bias against concealed carry. While his company policy doesn't allow firearms on site, he doesn't want to contribute to the bias. Any suggestions for programs that are either positive or at least neutral on the topic?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different organizations that are teaching active shooter stuff. Again, we're not the only one by any means. Alice is a big one that a lot of people are going to know. Local law enforcements generally promote a lot of different courses, such as CRACE, which is CRASE. I've done some with FBI and a couple other ones. They get into a lot of places, and it's not necessarily that they're blatantly or vehemently against concealed carry, or at least in the experience that I've gone with, as much as they just don't really want to talk about the fight as in general, as a whole, be it unarmed or armed. They'll generally say, well, as a last response, you need to be able to fight back. But they don't really want to talk about the subject. They don't want to give any suggestions or any training on what that would look like, whether it's armed or unarmed. And I think oftentimes when they are addressed or approached with the question of, hey, what about a gun, a concealed carry, all that kind of stuff, they pretty much push under the rug. And a lot of that's going to come back to liability issues, both for the businesses that they're going in or at least trying to get in to get the training to. And then also, especially if you're working with a local law enforcement department, it's pretty tough for, here in Columbus, for Columbus Police Department to walk into a group or a public setting or a school or a business and say, hey, I'm going to teach you possibly how to tackle someone to the floor and bludgeon them to death. That's not exactly a topic they want to discuss. So they kind of say, hey, look, at the resort or last resort, you might have to fight back. What that looks like is, well, you might grab onto the gun, but we're not really going to do anything about it. So I don't know that there's any programs, at least I haven't seen any programs that are like, guns are bad, stay away from guns, as much as they just don't want to talk about the fight in general. And they really don't want to hang their hat on it. I think that's what makes us a little bit different. We want people to understand that the program we're offering is an individual response, and it's based around the concept of being unarmed and being able to maybe access improvised weapons or implement tools. But the underlying tone, the underlying concepts are, how do we fight back without those tools? And then how do we meaningfully implement those tools if we have access to them? And then the addition of Rob into the mix with that stuff and the firearms is fantastic, because he really addresses, hey, look, these are the things you have to consider moving into it. What does it actually look like if I were to be that guy that gets a hold of the gun? Rob, you can add on to that, but I haven't seen any programs that are vehemently, blatantly saying like, no, guns are bad, it's the worst thing that could ever happen, as much as just generally not talking about the topic of fighting in a realistic manner anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I think they downplay the fight side for sure. I have definitely run into the individual instructors, especially from the law enforcement community. I was a member of the law enforcement community, but unfortunately I've run into a lot of individual instructors who are very condescending to the idea of concealed carry, maybe not blatantly against it, because by policy, none of these places want to come out and say, oh, that's bad. Don't carry the gun. Don't exercise your Second Amendment rights. There's no way you could help. A lot of them as companies, the ALICE program stands out. Like, they don't want to say that overtly, but implicitly, I definitely think it's a soft sell. And I've definitely heard instructors individually. I'm in the media a lot, so I'll do radio, call-in shows, and I'll be on with someone else, maybe somebody else who represents another program, and they'll be pretty vehemently against the idea and almost kind of dismiss the idea that a concealed carry person will be able to do anything. And unfortunately, I think that they disempower people when they do that. They're not saying go get the training. Make sure what I say. Make sure you know what skills you're capable of applying. Make sure that you understand what it would mean when you bring that gun into the fight, and you could be making yourself look like a bad guy to responding law enforcement. You need to take that into account, and you need to really believe that if you take that shot, you're making things better with expectation, not that you're just hoping to make things better. And that may not sound like as gung-ho to, yes, concealed carry is going to solve all the problems as a lot of people in our audience would like, because I don't feel that way. Just yesterday in South Carolina, a firefighter subdued a teenage gunman at a school, and Aaron will tell you, he's done more research than I have really into the 160, I believe, incidents documented by Homeland Security. It's available online. It's a PDF download, a documentation of a bunch of incidents from 2001 to 2013. And a significant number of those incidents were ended by unarmed, relatively low training level people in the environment who just took on the gunman. They decided to fight. Of course, everybody knows about the Paris train, where multiple people were involved in subduing a very determined terrorist who pulled multiple weapons and really was very determined to hurt people, but unarmed people stop him. So I think that message inside of the gun community is incredibly important, because we do ourselves a disservice as the gun community to suggest that the only thing that stops a bad guy is a good guy with a gun. It's not true. The only thing that stops a bad guy is a determined and capable and willful good guy with whatever tool or lack of tools he has.
So Aaron, this person that asked this question, they're a member of their company's safety committee, and it sounds like they're trying to create an active shooter response training program. So knowing that this company doesn't do concealed carry, what advice do you have then for this person on this committee and creating an active shooter plan for their place of work?
Yeah, so we do a lot of security consultations for businesses, large businesses, small businesses, and everything along those lines. I was just at one of the largest automotive dealers here just the other day, and we were going through safety protocols, security protocols. Here's the thing you have to understand, or again, this is from our view. I need to put a security plan in place. I get that. The security plan is essentially going to fall back to understanding the ways around the building, get out of the building. What we tell people is evade, barricade, respond is generally what we lay our hat on. But at the end of the day, to lay out a plan and to tell people, hey, look, this is your plan, only gets you so far. It gets people thinking properly. So what we generally tell businesses are that, look, we want you to come up with a plan. We want you to explain to people what the general rules of that plan are going to look like. Get them familiar with the building, all of the entries, all of the exits in and out, different places that could be options for barricading. Different places that could be options for whether it's an improvised weapon or something that could be used as a force multiplier. Get people thinking about that, lay that plan out. But at the end of the day, that plan's only going to get them so far. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to be thinking when somebody comes in and starts shooting a bunch of people in the middle of your business, nobody's going to go, oh shit, let me think back to page 11 in the instructor manual or, in the employee manual for me to understand what to do in this situation. So what we really try to make people understand is that active shooter response, and it's just ambush, massive, aggressive violence response, comes down to an individual response. 12 people in the same exact room for the same exact shooting are going to respond completely differently. They're going to fall into four basic categories if we want to look at it. They're either going to run, they're either going to fall down, freeze, not do anything about it. They may take action, or they may go, for a position of barricading. But they're all going to respond differently. They're going to pick up information differently. They're going to process it differently. So as a safety officer, as somebody for my business that's trying to protect my employees, I'm going to lay out a basic plan and a basic outline. I'm going to supply them with a lot of information to get that going. But at the end of the day, those employees need to train. They need to actually get hands-on. They need to learn to plug a gunshot wound. They need to learn, how a chest seal works. They need to learn what it's going to be like to tackle someone, possibly to hit someone. If we do think there's improvised weapons that they could use at their facility, they're building, like if you work in the Louisville Slugger plant, you can get a hold of a baseball bat super easy. Then, hey, let's talk about what that looks like. How do I learn to generate force if that's going to be the weapons I'm going to get a hold of? They have to understand those things, and that's not going to come from a manual. So for businesses oftentimes that don't want to bring guys like us in to actually teach physical training, we go ahead and we say, look, here's all the safety protocols. Here's all the information. You can have it for free. I'm going to help you build a plan. By the way, I'm going to set up a training that's independent of yours, and you can send your employees to it, and you can, shift away from liability all you want, but they're not going to be their safest or reach their highest potential until they get hands-on. That's just kind of a fact.
Yeah.
So as a safety officer, he needs to just lay the road and lay for them the idea that, okay, I want to get involved and I need to get training. Here's the places you can go get training. That's your best option, especially if the business isn't going to bring somebody like us in to teach you how to do it.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you bring up the point of the 3 different ways to respond. So Rob, we have someone who asks, how do you really know when to respond or when to react? And is there really a big difference between the two?
I would definitely send somebody to Personal Events Network, or just, hit the search engine with my name or the words counter ambush and reaction versus response to really understand. There's a lot of depth to that answer. The quick version: reactions are natural, responses are either learned or improvised. So if you've done your training right, if you've established your sort of stimulus response patterns, like Aaron said, you're not going to page 11 in the manual. You actually have a learned response, and you recognize what you do at least the 100,000 foot level. So if bad things are happening over there and I can get out that door over here, then that's what I do. That's my response, is to evade, try to get away. If I can't get away, or let's say bad things are happening out in the hall and I'm not sure if I can get out one of these doors. So I try to get out that one and I see the bad guy and the bad things, and I can come back in here and I can barricade that door. That's the second part of the response. I recognize if evasion isn't a possibility, if I can't not be where the bad guy is and can't completely get away, in other words, out of this building, can I make it harder for him to get here and hurt me, get into a position where he can hurt me? And so I'm going to try to do that. If eventually the bad guy ends up in this room with me and he's in a position where he can hurt me, now I have to fight. Now I have to have a response. And if I plan ahead and I know what my responses could be, right? My response could involve this glass, because it's got a sharp edge. My response could involve this chair because it's heavy. My response could involve, the draperies, just smothering somebody, 3 or 4 other people. If I know what my response can be, well, I can't mount that response from 30 feet away right in front of the door. So now where I position myself in that barricade moment relative to this door, there's a little cutout here, and so I can show you because I'm in a big banquet room. So there's I can hide right in that corner. Somebody comes through that door, I'm in a pretty good ambush position. I can put people on the other side. We could get into a position where just in just a few minutes, I can be in here in 30 seconds because I've trained it and I've thought about the 100,000 foot view level, apply the responses to this exact environment. Now, I may be having a firearm. I may have a knife. I may have some other improvised or dedicated defensive tools that make my plan different. And obviously, if I'm going to use the sharp edge of a glass, I need to be over there. But if I'm going to use that firearm, well, now I could change my position and be a little bit further from that door, but still be effective. But I wouldn't want to be 80 feet away in that corner of this banquet room when I could be over here 18 feet away with a clean backstop and take advantage of the defensive firearm that I'm carrying. So there's a lot of different ways one can apply their responses, but the natural reaction is just going to happen. When that gunshot goes off, you're going to be startled, you're going to focus on it, and hopefully if you've trained well, you start to execute your responses because that stimulus brings them about.
So when do you engage and when do you decide to flee?
You always flee. I mean, the answer is flee. You always, evasion is always the preferred method. We try not to say first thing because it's not necessarily linear, right? If tomorrow when this banquet room is full, somebody stands up in this row with a gun and starts shooting at people, well, evasion isn't an issue, right? I'm not barricading between me and the guy here with a gun, so I'm going to have to fight him. I'm going to have to respond to the person who's 6 feet away. That's the first thing. So you do the best thing you can. The best thing you do is get away. The next best thing you could do is make it so that the bad guy can't actually reach you, and you stay here until the police arrive and take care of it. The next thing you're going to have to do is fight, because what's the other option, right? If there is no other option except hide under this table and hope, that's not an option. right? So we try to instill that in people, is that it's pretty obvious. Get away if you can. Hide or barricade if you can't get away. And ultimately, if the bad guy finds you, you need to fight. There is no other option. And that defines when you engage. You engage when you don't have the other options. And Aaron, how do you articulate, similarly, I would assume?
Yeah. You pretty much nailed it on the head. There's no clear cut. One of the things we say in our seminars all the time is, I almost refer to it as the gray zone. There's times where, if the gunshots are 2 buildings over, I'm going to be able to have a clearer mind. I'm going to be able to have an easier escape. There's a little more obvious kind of a reaction to that. But like Rob said, if the gunshots take place and it's 10 feet away from me, after the natural reactions take over and I'm able to start either, doing, my response or trying to process information to eventually work towards a response, there's never going to be like oh yeah, that's the exact right answer 100% of the time. You do the best that you can. And we always want people to understand that getting out and evading is by far the best option. Our seminars spend a bunch of time tackling people, hitting them, talking about guns and everything else. But we have to reiterate over and over and over again, especially in the scenarios, we don't want you to have to do this. This is just what we need to train the most out of. So running is always going to be your best option. If you can't do that, keep the bad guy away. And if you can't keep the bad guy away and nothing else made sense, and in that moment you had that just visceral response to go that direction, then you just got to do it as aggressive as possible. Nobody can tell you this is the right time to fight, this isn't the right time to fight, because nobody's there. They're not processing information like you're processing information. You're the only one that can make that decision, and it's never going to be 100%. You're making the best possible decision you can make with the information that's presented to you and the tools that you already had way before the event started, is essentially what it comes down to. So people hate it. There's no quick, easy answer to it, but you're going to have to do the best that you can. Here's the order of operations. Let's talk about the general concepts. And then honestly, like I said, it just comes down to what made the most sense at the right time.
So we had someone ask, what's the best way to get to know or train how you would react suddenly finding yourself in an active shooter situation? How do you balance the defending, shooting, getting safe with taking care of people around you as well? Do you want to take a swing at that, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm like going back and forth, like who's talking? So as far as training, it's kind of almost like a 2-part question in there. It seemed like, how do you balance all this, but then also how do you get to a point where you're training the best responses? As far as training the best responses, it's going to come down to finding good, realistic training. One of the reasons that we do scenarios at the end of it is to put people in there, get it as realistic as possible within safe measures, and give them a little bit of what it might be like to have to make those decisions. As far as the balancing act for training, when we do our seminars, I've made this reference before, and Rob's heard me say it, but there's days where you need to be a scalpel and there's days where you need to be a jackhammer. And when we come in and we do these trainings, we're trying to give people an overall 1,000-foot view of everything that might be involved in a response for an active shooter situation or mass violence in general, right? And there's a little bit of fighting, there's a little bit of grappling, there's a little bit of generating force from striking, there's a little bit about the gun, there's a little bit about the medical side. If you look at those components and you go, all right, the most plausible thing for me, maybe I'm not a concealed carry person, I'm not somebody who often has my gun on me. So the most plausible thing for me is that I'm not going to have a gun. If I do have to fight back, it's most likely going to be unarmed or improvised weapons. Then I want to focus my training on that. What is plausible, realistic training around an unarmed scenario? If I do frequently have my firearm, then I want to be focusing a little on that. And I need to focus on those little key components of what my weaknesses are. Eventually, the perfect world would be that everybody watching this right now and everybody that we touch goes off and they shoot 3 or 4 times a month, and they're in twice a week learning to generate force and grapple, and they're going to medic courses and trauma courses, and they're running their family through all of these active shooter drills and engagements and all that kind of fun stuff. Like, that would be the perfect world. But realistically, with the budget you have and the time you have for training and things along those lines, not everybody's that person. We're lucky enough to be able to do that. This is what we do for a living. So we get to kind of spend a lot of our time training. Most people can't. So I want to look at, one of the things that I stole directly from Rob and is part of the CFS program and everything he does is just that basic plausibility principle. Look at the things that make the most sense as far as what might actually happen. What are the events that could possibly happen? Look at what makes the most sense as far as the responses go, and then just start hammering at your weaknesses. When we put people through these courses, I ask them, I say, look, if you felt severely uncomfortable with the tackling aspect or grabbing a gun aspect, but you felt good about striking and plugging a gunshot wound, then you need to find somebody to teach you how to grapple better. You need to get in close and personal. You need to tackle people. You need to grab and wrestle around and learn that type of movement. So how do you balance that? You go after the most plausible stuff and the ones that you admittedly are the most afraid of and uncomfortable with, and you start to tackle those kind of headstrong right out of the gate.
Yeah, if it's uncomfortable to train with, maybe that's where it needs to be trained the most.
Yeah.
So let's move into kind of some protocols. We've had questions on what do you do after you've engaged, and what do you do after you escape? So Rob, if you want to take the protocol of there's an active shooter situation and you manage to escape, what's next? What should the person do next?
Communicate. The two supplemental pieces of the evade, barricade, respond pattern are arming yourself and communicating. And that comes out of a lot of the stuff that we teach inside of the home defense environment. So when we spun up the school attacker response course, we knew that the ideas of evade, barricade, and respond were going to resonate with the teachers, with the kids, with the staff, with the parents, everybody involved. When you talk about home defense, it's much more likely that you're going to have a purpose, designed and staged defensive tool, if not on your body, at least somewhere in the house, probably in your barricade area, and that you're going to need to communicate. You're going to need to call the police. So we add those as supplemental pieces. We talk about it in our instructor development, especially. We work them into the seminars as we can. The idea that now you have to communicate. What do you need to do? You need to tell the police. You need to tell everyone what's going on, that you can get in touch with. As you're escaping, if there's people looking at you like you're crazy running through the hall, let them know. Well, here's why I'm running. This is happening. So save as many people as you can by communicating, and then certainly let law enforcement know. I think that's the main thing you're going to want to do once you get out of there.
So Aaron, say you do engage in this active shooting scenario, what's the protocol afterwards? Or what should someone who has engaged, what should they do?
Well, first things first. I mean, we're teaching everybody again. When hear me say this term over and over. Your hierarchy of what's the most important to you is going to be completely different than everybody else in the room. So if I got stuck in a situation and I had to, take down a shooter, take a gun from them, maybe knock them unconscious or hog tie them like they did on the train in Paris, my next step 9 times out of 10 is going to come down to, is there anybody there that I feel directly accountable for? If I was there with my wife and my kid and I had to get into that mix, I don't care what your protocols are. The first thing I'm going to be concerned about is the well-being of my wife and my child. So a lot of that's going to come down to what is the most important thing to you in that moment. If you were there on your own after that instance, I do have to consider that law enforcement's on their way. So I don't want to be in a position where I look like a threat in any way, shape, or form. Like Rob said, I want to be able to communicate with them. If I feel confident or comfortable, or I'm driven, or in any way, shape, or form pulled to go take care of gunshot victims, and I have those skills and I have the resources I can pull up, then that might be something I want to immediately get into. It's one of those things where we would love to say, again, I'm going to be realistic. We would love to say, hey, look, you take the bad guy out and then you start plugging gunshot wounds and you're the morale builder and one guy's out doing this and there's all this communication. That's what we want out of people. But it's really going to come down to what makes the most sense for you and what's the most important thing for you right now, if we're being realistic. So if there's anybody else I'm accountable for, I'm going to be drawn to make sure that they're okay, and I'm going to be getting through that. To be completely honest, if I have to take a shooter down, I don't know that I'm going to be more concerned about keeping an eye on the shooter and checking everybody else, as opposed to getting myself to safety, getting everybody out of the building if I possibly can. Honestly, if I'm with my family, I'm going to go check to make sure that they're okay. I'm going to make sure I'm communicating with my family, letting them know that hey, this happened. All of that stuff's going to play into it. So what would the awesome protocol be, and what we want everybody to do? Yeah, you take the bad guy out, and now you're doing triage, moving around the room, making sure that you can take care of certain people and plugging gunshot wounds and finding med kits or porous materials or things we can use for chest seals. Communicating with law enforcement is going to be a very, 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 very big one. But realistically, we're teaching you to save yourself. So if I take a bad guy out and I don't know whether there's another explosive somewhere or there might be another shooter somewhere, then I might be honestly just thinking, I got to get the heck out of here. maybe I'll tell people to get out and I'll help people move, and I might drag a guy over because he got shot in the leg or help him out. But realistically, we want you to be safe. We want you to move off that scene and get to safety as soon as possible. So there's the what we would like you to do, and then what's realistic. And we kind of want to toe those lines between them.
Yeah, for sure. You brought up a really interesting point of communicating to law enforcement, Rob. I know that that was multiple questions on this topic of you're in an active shooter situation. How do you communicate to law enforcement and also other concealed carry people that might be on the same active shooting scenario as you or situation? How do you not be mistaken as the bad guy?
Well, ultimately, we had the situation in Texas, I don't know, almost a month ago, I guess now, about a month ago, where 2 law enforcement officers were responding, and apparently at least one of them, I think probably both of them, were in plainclothes by their agencies they were with, and one law enforcement officer shot another law enforcement officer. If you have a gun, if you are acting aggressively in any way, if you pick up a knife, if you take the glass and you break it, and you put an edge on it, if you are looking like an aggressor, you put yourself in the position of sending the message to responding law enforcement or any other would-be good guy that you are an aggressor, that you look like someone who's trying to hurt people. So we talk about things like extended readies. If you have a concealed carry firearm and you're running around with your gun at extension, looking for a bad guy to shoot, you're going to look like someone who's looking for victims, especially if you're swinging that gun around in a crowd. So there's a whole bunch of reasons not to have your gun out at extension if you're not actually in a shooting situation. So keep that gun in close. Maybe even roll that muzzle down into something like we would call a stool position. Keep this hand out, kind of shielding it. Why not keep the gun in your holster, right? If you're practicing for concealed carry and you're properly trained and you're ready to draw that gun and shoot, if the bad guy isn't in the room, you don't need to have the gun out in the ready position, right? If the bad guy is outside the hallway and you're barricaded in here, that gun can be in the holster with your hand on it. If that door starts to break through, you can go to the ready position. And certainly you need to be listening and paying attention. If it's the law enforcement officers that are coming through, you need to get that gun out of your hand. You need to get that gun back in your holster if you can, just drop it to the ground. I think the harder thing is really thinking about the other concealed carry permit holders, because when you maybe the bad guy is right there, you draw your gun, you shoot, drop the bad guy, he's down, you pull that gun in, you look over to your right, there's another guy with a gun, but he's looking at you, and you're both looking at each other. Is he trying to kill somebody right now? Is he obviously a threat? Well, you're probably going to want to stop him. Is he got a uniform and a badge? You're probably going to want to surrender to him. There's that gray area. Maybe he's an off-duty cop. Maybe he's another concealed carry permit holder. Maybe he's the bad guy's partner who just saw his buddy get shot, and now he's not sure he wants to be a bad guy anymore. So that's a huge gray area. I can't tell you what's going to happen there, but I'm going to tell you that your training, your awareness, your thought process, your critical thinking, your observation, your ability to stop focusing on that guy and break your focus and look around, become aware of that person, and then read everything from the clothes they're wearing, the body language. If they're dressed just like the guy that you just had to shoot, carrying the same exact kind of gun that guy was carrying in the mall, they both had rifles. That's probably a clue for you. Whether he's shooting at you right now or a 9-year-old girl in the face right now, he's still probably part of this, and you got to read that. On the other hand, if it's some guy with a woman behind him and a kid cowering, grabbing his leg, and he's got a gun in his hand and he's not quite sure what's going on, well, that guy probably looks like a concealed carry holder to me. And obviously you've got guys in uniform, and you've got police that are trained to have their badge in one hand, or open, exposed, put that badge on their belt, tuck their shirt so the badge is at least visible near where the gun is. These are the kinds of things you want to start thinking about and looking for, because that communication is largely going to be nonverbal. It's going to be observation. It's going to be what you see and what they see. So don't make yourself look like an aggressor, and make sure if you're going to pull the trigger, you're pulling the trigger on someone who is actually a bad guy.
Good, solid advice there. That was definitely a question that came up multiple times. And we're about a little over halfway for this month's PDN Live. For those of you that are just tuning in, we have Rob Pincus and Aaron Jannetti, and our topic tonight is active shooter. If you are catching us at a later date, oh wait, let me go back on that. If you're here live and you have questions, go ahead and type them in the questions box below, and we'll do our best to get around to them. If they're on topic, we'll more than likely answer them. For those of you that are tuning in at a later date and you like what you are hearing and seeing, you can subscribe to our free newsletter, and you can find that at personaldefensenetwork.com. And there's probably a link somewhere on this page that you are on as well to find that. So we've talked about, preparing and training for this, as well as having a plan in your workplace for active shooter scenarios and what you do or don't do in there. So another question that's come up as well a lot is, I just had it. Let's see here. Working in a gun-free zone. What are suggestions? I know, Rob, that you've covered this before in other PDN lives, but in a gun-free zone, active shooter response, you're unarmed. How do you, if you have to engage, how do you engage?
You want me to grab that one?
Yeah, go ahead and grab that one, Aaron. Thanks.
Okay. So this is pretty much where we go. This is where we focus. Because even if you are a concealed carry holder and you're, vigilant and you train, there are places where you're not going to have your gun. Or let's just say shouldn't, if you're being a legitimate, law-abiding, respectful citizen as it goes into it. Places like courthouses, federal buildings, schools, airports. I had a guy one time that I was like, yeah, you're not going to have your gun in an airport. He goes, I do. And I'm like, that's not a thing. It's okay. But as you go into it, there's places you're going to be that are unarmed. Now, if I work in a place that doesn't allow me to do that, I really want to be focusing on it. So the concepts don't change, and that's really what we want people to understand. Whether I have a gun on me or not, the underlying concepts, the base plan, the idea of what I'm looking to do stays the same. Make as much distance between you and the bad guy, keep the bad guy away from you, and make it hard for him to get to you. And if you have no other choice, you're going to have to fight back. The difference between not having a firearm, which is my projectile from across the room, and just having improvised weapons is proximity. It's going to be how close I have to get to the bad guy. So what people have to understand, and one of the biggest things they're going to have to understand right out of the gate is, if I don't have access to a firearm, and even if I do have access to a firearm, if I'm not in a position to use that firearm realistically, then I have to understand that my response from a fighting standpoint is going to be hands-on. You're going to feel them breathing. You are going to feel, if they start bleeding, you're going to feel their blood. If you start bleeding, you're going to feel your own blood, everything else in between it. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but they have to come to that realization right out of the gate. So the first step to understanding any of this stuff is, if I don't have that implement and I don't know really how to use it realistically, I need to accept that this is going to be an ugly fight if I find myself into it, but I'm going to go at it with everything that I've got. As far as how do we respond with that, I'm going to tell you right now, is absolutely aggressive as possible. I want to close as much distance as I can. Anywhere, I tell people all the time, I'm either 1,000 miles an hour running away, clear, not being able to be shot, not being able to be stabbed, not being able to be grabbed, or I'm 1,000 miles an hour directly at them. Because everywhere in the middle is where you die, right? Where you don't completely commit to what's going on. So if I'm in an unarmed situation, I'm in a place that doesn't allow me to carry my firearm, or I found myself again in a place where I couldn't even use my firearm properly without hurting other people or even getting that shot, completely taken care of, then I'm going to have to get hands-on. When I get hands-on, I want to be as aggressive as possible. Wrapping the gunman up, putting them into the floor if I can, controlling the gun the best I can, literally putting it into a position where they can't ever get back up again. One of our very good friends, Ryan Hoover, teaches these. He runs an organization called AKD. And, I was at one of his seminars, and he literally, like, one of the most powerful moments in the world is he goes, the guy goes down, he doesn't get back up again. And like, he looks at everybody, he says he doesn't get back up again. And that's the truth, right? But man, that's hard. How many people that you're going to go into your business and go, hey, look, this is our active shooter plan. Oh, by the way, if you have to fight back, we're going to fight back. How many of them are actually legitimately understanding that means you might have to knock someone unconscious or kill them? That's not easy. So we have to make that psychological jump. We have to make that connection that, hey, look, this is going to suck. This is going to be really, 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 really bad. But I have no other choice in this moment. If this is where I found myself, it was either die on my knees or die fighting, and I'm going to put myself in that position to go there. So grabbing onto the gun, grabbing onto the body, putting them into the floor by tackling them, all that's going to be dependent on what's presented first. If we're in a wide open space, wrapping the gunman up and tackling them like the gentleman down in the Carolinas, is probably going to be your best bet, at least to be effective and to mess with their plan, and then eventually hopefully put them into the floor. If I'm in a barricade and they entered through the barricade, or they were coming around the corner and they were coming muzzle first, gun first, whatever that is, then I might be in a position to grab onto the gun. No matter what, whether I wrap them up or I grab onto the gun, I have to stop the threat behind the gun. So taking the gun away from it doesn't stop. What Rob was referring to earlier with the Paris train attacks, for a lot of people that don't know, is a gentleman started with a rifle. They were wrestling over the rifle. While they were wrestling over the rifle, he drew a handgun out, shot one guy in the neck. So now he had a handgun and a rifle. So he moved from a rifle to a handgun. When they removed the handgun from him, he pulled out a box cutter and started slashing at him with a box cutter. He also happened to have a hammer and a thing of petrol on him. So, I mean, he was ready to do damage no matter what. So getting a hold of the gun isn't the end of the game. I now have to stop the threat that's behind it, whether that's by hog tying them with a group of people, tackling them and holding them down with a group of people, or me beating that person into the floor, attacking their weaknesses like their airway, their consciousness, things like that. That is the reality of what you're going to have to deal with. And again, that's not easy. And we don't sugarcoat it. We don't walk in and go, yeah, this is super easy. You're just going to tackle them and there's no problem with it. We're very realistic about it. But if you're in that position, you're unarmed, then you're going to have to get hands-on. If I can get an improvised weapon, that's fantastic. We often talk about fire extinguishers. Spray them with the white stuff, beat them with the red can. Chairs, like Rob was mentioning earlier, if I can break glass and use glass, if I can pick up random heavy objects and hit them with them, all that stuff's fantastic. But understand that all that stuff takes place within 2 arms reach. It takes place very close. It's very hands-on. And a lot of people don't make that connection. They go, oh, yeah, fighting back. It's this. I was at one of those CRACE courses, and the guy goes, yeah, if this happens, I just grab onto the gun like this, and I'm going to twist my hip, and we're going to end up on the floor. And I'm looking at him going like, you're making it sound so easy. But you have to make that connection, that legitimate psychological connection, that if I do find myself in that spot, I'm going to be grabbing on, I'm going to be hitting, I might feel blood, I'm going to feel them breathing, I'm going to have a person that doesn't want to be stopped that I'm trying to stop. And that's a connection a lot of people make. So it's a big psychological jump first, and then you just got to get the aggressive physical training behind it after that.
Yeah, you're right. The reality of it is, yeah, you're going to be breathing each other's faces. There's going to be blood. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to suck. And
yes.
Rob, how do you psychologically train yourself for that? I know that last month's topic, we did touch base on that, but do you want to kind of rehash that? Like, how do you train yourself psychologically for that?
I think you start right now. As everything Aaron just said, you just kind of internalize that, and in an hour, you maybe listen to that part again, and tomorrow you listen to it with some friends, you talk to some people about it, and you have to get past that now, so you're not getting past that in the moment, because like Aaron said, you need to be 1,000 miles an hour, and if you're hesitant, that's where you're going to get hurt. From all the extreme close quarters training we've done, most of it with high-end military, high-end law enforcement teams over the years, I can tell you that the aggression, the assertiveness, the decision to act is what saves people when one person has a gun and the other person doesn't. If the person without the gun is going to win that moment, it's going to be because of aggression and determination and speed and decisiveness in action. Because if you hesitate, all that person has to do is point that, with the rifle, that quarter inch that represents that laser beam, where that quarter inch round comes out. That's what's going to hurt you. If you can get offline, stay offline, drive that gun offline, point it to the ground, point it to the ceiling, and survive that second, and then continue fighting, because that's not the end of it. It's not just grab the muzzle and turn your hip and it's over, but that's really when the fight starts, once you've survived the initial ambush. So you've got to be fast, you've got to be decisive to do that, where you position yourself in the room, how fast you make the decision, and that all starts now. That can't be decided in the moment. You can't say, well, I'm not sure if I could do that, but I'd like to think so. And I guess if the time came, I'd really have to do it. Well, that's not going to help. Like, right now is when you decide that you're willing to do it because of, protecting what you love, defending your legacy. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it so you can ride your motorcycle tomorrow? Are you doing it so you can kiss your kid good night? Are you doing it so you can finish and get your master's degree and make the world a better place? Are you doing it so you can see your mom? I don't care why you're doing it, but be prepared to do it. And maybe thinking about why is what helps you determine that you will do it.
So Aaron, we've been talking about active shooter response. Let's kind of shift gears to just active attack. How do you respond to like a knife attack, or like I believe it was in Germany, where someone had an axe on the train? How do you respond to, and I would assume a much more intense attack when it's more using tools, not necessarily a firearm, but like a knife or an axe?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say much more intense, because one of the things, and again, kind of, not to keep plugging, Rob, but if you do watch through his counter ambush stuff, and he does talk about a lot of these things, the auditory bang bang loud booms of the gun actually will make things a little more intense. Because think about it, in the knife attacks, especially in Minnesota recently during the knife attack that took place there, how many people actually knew that people were getting stabbed? You know what I mean? 9 times out of 10 in a knife attack, what's going to end up happening is some guy gets stabbed, starts freaking out, starts screaming. Everybody else is just freaking out and screaming, but not a lot of people really know exactly what's going on because there's not that obvious bang, bang, loud noise where everybody can know it. So the fight itself is going to be a little more intense, but the kind of perception of it, the recognition of it actually isn't going to be that intense. It's going to be a lot more quieter. It's a lot more personal. Here's the one thing we always tell people. The whole concept of evade, barricade, respond is self-defense in a nutshell if you really want to kind of look at it, right? Think about a home invasion situation. Somebody kicks down the front door in my house. If I can get out of my house, I get out of my house. That's always the best option, right? I'm not here to argue like castle doctrine and I'm going to stand my ground and all that kind of fun stuff. Like if I get out of the house, I don't want to fight. I'm going to get out of the house. If I can't get out of the house, I want to keep the bad guy away from me. So maybe I go into a barricade in somewhere in my house, a designated barricade spot for my family. If I don't have either of those options, then what am I left with? Guess what? Fighting back. Is it with a tool? Is it without a tool? Is it unarmed? Is it all that kind of stuff? It's all the same. Nothing really changes. What changes is the psychology of the attack if you really want to kind of look at it. So in a knife attack, same rules apply, right? Evade. It's different now because if I'm running away and I'm 20 feet away from the guy already, unless he's a trained knife thrower, I don't have to worry about that 20-foot distance as opposed to with an active shooter. So running is always, always, always going to be your best option. Keeping the bad guy away is always going to be a fantastic option. Now, if I have to respond to the actual fight portion, if I'm there, again, if I have the tool, then maybe I have the tool. If I know I have my clear backstop. We know that, the gentleman in Minnesota that used his firearm to take the bad guy down, he was a volunteer, former police chief, tactical trainer, and everything else in between, like perfect guy to have there when people are getting stabbed, right? Which was fantastic. But if I don't have that, then it's not so much what is the difference in responding to the attack as much as what's the difference in the anatomy of the fight, right? Where it was me grabbing onto a muzzle or a gun before, what's it look like to grab onto a rifle? What's it look like to grab onto a handgun? Now what's it look like to grab onto a knife, right? I have to understand, again, going back to how close and interpersonal that fight is going to be. If I just got done stabbing you or I just stabbed a bunch of other people, I'm going to have their blood on my arm. So it's going to make it harder to hold on to the knife, harder to hold on to the arm. You know, how do I deal with that? It's going to be nasty. So when you talk about that intensity level, the fight itself, when we do actually meet, is going to be insane, right? When we talk about dealing with a knife or dealing with an axe, you know, again, if I had no choice and I couldn't run, right? We're assuming I couldn't run and I couldn't barricade and I had to engage with this person. I want to stay away from the danger, which is the blade the best that I can, whether it's an axe or whether it's a knife. So using, you know, any type of redirection, using body movement to stay out of the way of it. But then I'm going to have to control that limb as absolutely soon as possible. So we do a lot of training here personally with controlling limbs. If I can control the arm, I can control the threat, and then I can learn to strike and attack from that point. But it's never a knife defense. You know, I'm a Krav Maga instructor. I've done a lot of other, you know, different martial arts and training. We have knife defenses and gun defenses all over the place and things like that. But it never looks like that. It's never like that. So it comes down to stay away from the stabby parts. Once you've done that, we have to maintain or try to get control or maintain control of the limb so that no longer getting stabbed. And then it's the same exact principles. I want to put the guy down. I want to either knock him unconscious or kill him or, you know, remove the weapon. If the weapon goes flying in the middle of the fight, then maybe that's my opportunity to run. If I stun him or daze him and that's my opportunity to run, then I run from there. But the anatomy of it doesn't change. I'm still trying to run away. I'm still trying to keep the bad guy away from me. I'm still going to fight back if I have no other choice. I'm still going to have to decide whether I'm using tools or not using tools. And then if I'm not using tools, the only thing that changes is now I don't have to worry about being shot from 10 feet or projectiles shooting out. I now have to control that implement, whatever that implement is, whether it's a baseball bat, whether it's a knife, whether it's an axe. You know, how I do that is stay away from the sharp edge stabby parts, and I try to control the limb the best that I can. And it's not as technical as you would think, right? It doesn't have to be some crazy wrist lock. Like bear hug the living crap out of the arm and start throwing headbutts, biting, screaming, and doing crazy, and that's perfectly fine, right? I'm gonna have to do whatever I have to do to deal with that. So it doesn't really change. It's just what that actual impact looks like is gonna be different based on the weapon that's there, if that makes sense.
I like that. Biting, screaming, doing crazy.
Everything, right? If you really legitimately, you know, people always make the comment like, yeah, you have to do it like you're fighting for your life. In this instant, you're legitimately fighting for your life. Do whatever the hell you have to do. get as nasty, get as brutal, and get as absolutely aggressive as possible. You have to make a decision. Once you make that decision, you got to act on it as violently as you can. Violence and action, violence and action, violence and action.
Mm-hmm. So, Aaron, I kind of want to go back to something that you talked about a little bit earlier in this this hangout, was your loved ones, your family, your wife, your kids, whatever. Say that you're doing all this training for it, but more than likely you're going to be out with them. How do you prepare them to respond with you, in sync with you, whether that's your kids or your wife, although your wife is a badass, so she'd be fine. But how do you handle that aspect?
My first suggestion is to have your wife continually train and become a self-defense instructor and shoot guns and learn to stab people. But I mean, honestly, I mean, that's it. Look, here's one of the things that we get into oftentimes. You know, again, our brick and mortar here in Columbus, this is what we do. We teach self-defense classes 6 days a week, right? We take Sundays off. You know, and technically we still have grappling classes on Sundays. So 7 days a week, we are teaching people to fight back in some form or fashion, you know, whether it's unarmed or armed. But one of the things that gets me oftentimes is people will come in and they'll tell me like, oh yeah, you know, I want to learn, you know, self-defense because I want to be able to protect my family. And there's this little, I don't say it, it's not the first conversation we ever have, but it's going to be a conversation coming up where I look at them and I go, this is awesome. I respect you for showing up. You want to be that protector and you're going to be here. But I have one question for you. You're here and your wife and kid are at home right now. So who is protecting your wife and kid right now if you're here with me, right? And so the answer to that is I have to get them involved. Now, easier said than done. You know, I met my wife because, as faux pas as it is, she was one of my students 8 years ago, and we developed an amazing love story that will eventually be on you know, straight to DVD. But with that, I want them to get involved. If I truly, truly, truly care about my loved ones and I truly care about their well-being, then you have to have the conversations. You have to talk about, okay, look, hey, I just watched this 1 hour, you know, hangout with a couple of guys that seem to know what they're talking about. These were the topics. These are the ones that spurred me. Let's talk about this. Let's have this conversation, you know, as my wife, as my husband, as, you know, my child, if you're old enough to really comprehend some of these things. Let's have this conversation. If I really want them to understand, you know, how to operate a gun, if I have guns in the house, then everybody in the house should be comfortable operating that gun, at least in some form or fashion. I can't just expect my wife to magically understand how to shoot a gun and, you know, in the middle of this stuff if she's never been out and used it. If I really want them to be able to defend themselves, I need to get them into the classes, right? I'm going out and getting the classes because I think it's important. It's just as important for the other person in the family to be able to do that. When you're talking about your kids, yes, age is going to come down to it. You know, my son right now is 7 months old. He's not doing anything. So the response in that situation is going to be that, you know, hopefully I'm putting myself between the threat and my loved ones, and my wife's only job is to get the heck out of Dodge, right? As soon as possible, the best as she can. She needs to be able to move, you know, our son to somewhere safe. As the kids get older, we can start getting into essentially just, you know, for lack of a better term, but like stranger danger drills, right? If I say this, you have to listen to me. This means I'm being serious and I need you to take this action, be it running to this designated rendezvous point, or, you know, going and finding mom and all those things. Like, those conversations need to be had. I don't need to teach that kid at 4 years old, you know, hey, you're going to grab onto this dude and bite his ankles while I'm punching him in the head. Like, that's not it. But I need to start having conversations where if I say something, if I act in a certain way, that I can get my son to reliably move towards an objective. And the further he gets away from that situation, the better I'm going to be able to handle that situation, because I'm not now immediately concerned about where is my son located while also, you know, fighting a guy with a knife or worrying about the muzzle of a gun. So I want to be able to start talking to them and get communication on where should you guys run and how do we get that done. As they start getting older, though, they've got to learn to fight. I mean, they just really, 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 really do. And I don't care where you stand on it. The fact of the matter is, if you want your son to be able to protect himself, to feel confident, you have son or daughter, I keep saying son because I have a son, but, you know, son or daughter, to feel confident, to understand where they're at, to, you know, not panic and freeze as much in these violent situations, they have to get in there and they have to do it. You know, I told my wife, I said, I don't care what our kid does. He can run track, he can do ballet, he can be a gymnast. I literally don't care. But he will do grappling and he will do self-defense and he'll shoot guns every now and again because he needs to learn how to take care of himself. Mm-hmm. So the answer to that is if you really, really, really care about your loved ones, they need training just as much as you need training. You are not going to be there 24/7. They're not attached to your hip. And let's say that I am the protector and I am with them and I'm the first person to get shot. If I didn't train them first and I didn't train them to take care of themselves, now what good am I, right? So I love, and I'm not putting people down. Like I love people that show up and go, I want to protect my family. I'm here to train. Like that is the best thing in the world. Because if you don't, we need to have conversations. But if you're trying to protect your wife and that's why you're here, then your wife needs to be here training as well. And if you want to protect your son or your daughter, they need to get in here and do some form of training as well. Or you at least need to start having the conversations with them. It can't be this, I'm the big badass in the house and I'm going to take care of everybody. That's not how it works. It just doesn't. There's your answer. Train, get them to train just as much as you do.
Yeah, and so Rob, I kind of want to bring through the current events that are going on. I know that you've done a video on kids in school and how they can train to protect themselves, and especially with what happened yesterday. Do you want to close us out with just kind of touching base on that topic?
Yeah, I think that's everyone needs to be empowered. You know, the idea that the good guy is going to save you, or the idea that Aaron was just talking about, you're the good guy and you're going to save your family, that just may not play out that way. You know, and it goes back to what Aaron said right in the beginning when he was talking about what our program is through Endeavor. It's individual response program, and that's every individual. Everybody listening, you know, share this with the people you care about. Don't just take this and say, okay, I'm going to get ready, or I'll be the guy that protects the workplace. Share it. You know, get the conversation started. One of the things we tell people when they leave a seminar, and essentially this is a seminar, you just attended a live, you know, panel discussion on active shooter response, and we took questions from the audience. Now go home and think about this stuff. Think about it and then discuss it with your family members. And if you let them watch this recording, then when you discuss this, they're coming in as idea generators. They're coming in with already formed questions about what should we do? Or are we going to do this? Well, can we do this? And those questions and those discussions are valid, right? Because it's an individual program. So you discuss it, you think about it some more, you know, and then you start a training program where people can look at this at Personal Defense Network, you know, this comprehensive defensive training program and family defense when it comes especially to active shooter response or home invasion, home defense. Starts with a discussion, and then it starts with planning. And we say the 3 C's, you know, you coordinate, that's your plan. And then you have to plan to communicate because there's things you can't account for, there's variables. And then ultimately you have to cooperate with one another. So that's your workplace, that's your friends, that's 5 guys that are crammed into a bathroom in the back of a restaurant because that's where you ended up hiding when somebody started shooting the place up. Obviously you may not have planned anything, but you absolutely could be in a situation where now you can communicate with them and then cooperate and work together. But ultimately, it comes down to you as the individual that initiates that, your loved ones as individuals that may have to do it on their own. So I think that's really the key, is getting people to talk about this stuff, sharing this information, whether it's this video or something else from Personal Defense Network or the handout from the Department of Homeland Security, whatever you can get your hands on, get the conversation started and get people thinking about this so that they aren't hesitating and they aren't helpless. They aren't just hoping when you're not there.
Good advice. So, Rob, where do people go for more information or to follow up on this topic?
PersonalDefenseNetwork.com. They can also look at the School Attacker Response course online, particularly in the elementary schools and public schools. We have a free DVD that we produced at PDN for anyone who's actually a staff or faculty member at any school. They can get that sent to them. You can look at that at ICEstore.us, I think it is. You go in there and it's you know, you pay your $4 shipping and handling, whatever, but it's a free DVD. That information is also available to anybody else on the School Attacker Response side or the Active Shooter Response side. And our Active Shooter Response is primarily aimed at people who carry guns to think about how they might be able to use that gun in one of those situations. Shooting in defense of others is a topic that we've covered several times at Personal Defense Network.
Awesome. And Aaron, thank you so much for being with us tonight. If people want to follow up with you or find more information, how do they contact you or connect with you?
Well, thank you first and foremost for having me. We actually have a full resource page that's completely free and open to the public. So if you go to endeavordcf.com/active shooter, We have lists of upcoming courses, including our instructor development courses that we're coordinating with as well with ICU training. We have videos on there from various contributors, myself, Rob, a couple of our medical guys on trauma care. We have stuff from Tony Blauer on there, stuff from Ryan Hoover on there. So a lot of different contributors. On that same exact page, there's articles, research studies done by Department of Homeland Security, by National Association of Emergency Medical, one of the most recent wound profile research studies, things on there, and then also news reports and media and things like that. So that's one of the best resources, and we just keep adding to it. We're filming more videos. As Rob films more videos, we put them on there. As new news reports will come out, we try to update it. We just added the San Bernardino full police report. So if you're in for 161 pages of analytical data on what happened in San Bernardino in December, that's definitely an option as well. So all that stuff's on there. Again, that's endeavordcf.com/active shooter. And then again, you can find us, Endeavor DCF, on Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. And you can find me at Facebook.com/Jannetti Aaron.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for being on. And Rob, thank you for joining us as well. And for those of you that like what you're hearing, sign up for our free newsletter at personaldefensenetwork.com. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat below. And throughout the week, Rob and Aaron will check back and answer when they can. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and have a good night.